March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet over Germany. The sky is so thin it squeaks in your lungs, and the sunlight turns the aluminum skin of AB-17 into a floating shard of ice. The crew of Hell's Fury rides the slipstream, eyes watering, intercoms crackling, and in the very back where the fuselage narrows into a glass bubble, Staff Sergeant Michael Mike Donovan owns 7 feet of steel, 2 Browning 50s, and the last word between his crew and whatever is coming up their 6. If you freeze the moment, the needles are steady, the formation is tight, and nothing is wrong yet. Unfreeze it, and the distant glints coalesce into predators. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s building a shape out of math and murder, aligning for a textbook stern quarter attack. Procedure says wait. Training says conserve. Common sense says live. Donovan's hands tighten on the butterfly triggers. We will get to what he does in a minute. First, how he learned to pull first. South Boston made him quick before it made him tough. His father worked the docks where the wind never stops and the jokes are meaner than the winter. His older brother pounded canvas in Golden Gloves rings, where hesitation is how you spell glass jaw. Mike absorbed the rule that ruled them all. Waiting gets you hurt. Action keeps you breathing. By 17, he would tallied 32 street fights, 128. Lost 4 always, he said later, because he started too late. The day Pearl Harbor burned itself into every kitchen radio. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces, and the pipeline tried to drop him on a hangar floor with a wrench. He refused. He wanted the gunner school, the turret, the tight quarters where the world narrows to a bead and a heartbeat. The instructors did not like what they saw. Too aggressive, too willing to show himself, too liable to throw rounds before the range table said go. His answer turned into a hallway legend by Friday. Dead gunners do not shoot back. Live ones do. He graduated 3rd not on groupings, but on speed. Crazy fast target acquisition, the kind that made instructors check the stopwatch twice. He was not waiting for fighters to skate into his zone, like targets at a fair. He was out in front of them, learning their routes, anticipating their choices, hunting where they were going to be instead of pleading with where they were. He arrived at Framlingham, England, in March 44, which is to say he arrived at the sharpest part of the knife. The 390th Bomb Group had patched their bombers, so often the aluminum looked quilted. Hell's Fury already carried a reputation, 3 missions, 2 close brushes with oblivion, and a tail position that spooked hard men. Sergeant Eddie Morrison, the last tail gunner, had climbed out alive and asked for a transfer with the candor of a man who'd seen tomorrow and did not like it. That position's cursed. Next man dies there. Donovan volunteered before the echo faded. Captain James Whitmore, pilot, Yale shoulders and combat eyes, called him in. You know the numbers. Tail gunners have the highest casualty rate. 38% do not finish their tour. Then I have got 62% odds, Donovan said. I will take them. Why? Because I do not wait for them to shoot me. I shoot first. Whitmore studied the kid, who sounded like a knife fight standing up, nodded once, and said the line the crew would repeat for years. You are insane. You will fit right in. Donovan's first 2 missions wrote in pencil what he would later carve in stone. Schweinfurt, March 2nd, 109 down, 2 more bent. March 4th, a quiet experiment that made loud results. When a stack approached from 6 of the clock high, he ignored the lead, the decoy that invited every gun to track it, and stitched the wingman, the one riding a predictable line because discipline said hold formation. The wingman's aircraft broke like a matchstick. The leader, suddenly naked to the wind, peeled off, and the attack unraveled. Crew Chief Frank Murphy counted links when they landed. 1,600 rounds used out of 2,000. 80% on one hop. And we did not get hit, Donovan said. I will take that trade every day. What he would not take was doctrine at face value. In the barracks, under dim bulbs and louder snoring, he studied Luftwaffe habits on grease smudge diagrams. Echelon formations. Stern quarter approaches. Lead draws fire. Wingman exploit fixation. American gunners did what manuals told them, react, confirm, conserve. Germans did what hunters do, dictate, deceive, devour. Donovan found the seam between those ideas and pushed his thumb into it. What if defense started earlier than we admit? What if a burst at 800 yards is not wasted as insurance? What if you seize the timing and make him answer your question instead of letting him ask his? Back to March 6th. 12 specks become 12 sharks, and the air behind Hell's Fury tightens into a funnel. Procedure hums in his headset. Ammunition weight, range tables, closing speed. Somewhere far below, Germany grinds. Somewhere ahead, Augsburg waits. In the tail, Donovan inhales once, finds the lead element, tracks the second plane instead, and does the impolite thing. He acts first. They called her Hell's Fury because she came back smoking more often than not, a homeward comet dragging sparks across East Anglia's gray sky. At Framlingham, ground crews worked under floodlamps with cigarette tips for stars, riveting patches over long, finger-width slashes where 20mm shells had gnawed. The bomber's nose art a red devil grinning through prop wash had flaked at the edges from too many ice cycles and too many hurried scrubs of oil and blood. 3 missions in, 2 times nearly a casket. The men joked that if you stood still near her long enough, you could hear the airframe sigh. The tail, though that was the place sailors on leave called the coffin with a view. It was beautiful in a way that makes teeth hurt, a plexiglass blister where you sat backward, watching your fate arrive. No armor behind you. No escape hatch you could reach in time. Just a narrow catwalk forward and a churning sky aft, like a river flowing uphill straight into the rifles of a determined enemy. Sergeant Eddie Morrison had done his tour of that little cathedral of risk and walked away, alive barely. The second time a staffel cleaved toward them, they would chew the field of view into confetti. When Hell's Fury rolled back onto the hardstand, Eddie climbed down with the slow movements of a man counting vertebrae. He asked for a transfer without theatrics, in a voice the maintenance crew respected more than shouting. That position's cursed. Next man dies there. Donovan heard it, nodded once, and put his name in the box. People later swore they saw him smile. Others said he looked like someone staring down a hallway to a door that was not going to stay closed. Either way, Captain James Whitmore requested a chat. Whitmore had the look of a man 2 promotions overdue, thin, alert, a pilot grown narrow the way blades do when they have been ground and ground again. He kept the interview short. You know the statistics, he asked, not bothering with small talk. Tail gunner casualty rate is the highest in the ship. 38% do not finish their tour. Then I have got 62% odds, Donovan said. I will take them. Why? The word hung in the air like a challenge coin. Because I do not wait for them to shoot me, Donovan answered. I shoot first. Silence for a beat. In the corridor outside, someone's laugh burst and receded, the bass always breathing, always moving. Whitmore's eyes might have softened. Or not. Retellings vary. But the line everyone agrees on is the one he gave back, dry as British gin. You are insane. You will fit right in. It was not bravado that won the crew. It was how fast Donovan learned their rhythms, and how seriously he took the small rituals that meant you planned to come home. He talked ammo belts with crew chief Frank Murphy, argued for staggered tracer links to keep illusions alive longer. He timed the intercom lag, learned the way the navigator clipped his syllables when stress rose, and mapped where the waist gunner's fields overlapped so he could leave angles to them without turning his head. He memorized to feel the literal tremor in the deck of their turbo superchargers at climb power, the cadence of the ball turret's rotation when the gunner below him swept 5 of the clock to 7. To outsiders, it looked like superstition. To Donovan, it was data, the preface to a fight you win before it starts. But the airplane is a character, too, and Hell's Fury had moods. On cold mornings, the hydraulic fluid dragged like syrup. On warm ones, the tail would shimmy at altitude as if remembering the previous day's near miss. The crew had their jokes. The radio operator swore the set picked up German dance music when they crossed the coast. The bombardier said the Norden sight complained in Morse. What mattered was cohesion, the unspoken pact that each would work to make the next man's job simpler, not harder. It is why Donovan's heresy opened fire early, forced the enemy to adjust, began to sound less like madness, and more like a rephrasing of the pact. Take pain now to spare pain later. Even so, superstition clung. On the morning they chalked Donovan under tail gun in the crew ledger, a mechanic hammered a patch over a new wrinkle of torn aluminum and said without looking up, "You keep your head down, kid." Donovan smiled at that one, because tail gunners do not keep heads down. They keep them very still, very level, eyes up, hands quiet until they are not. He walked the length of the fuselage, running his palm along the ribbing, feeling the airplane's skeleton. Out on the hardstand, the wind came in off the North Sea, iron cold, and he stood in it until his cheeks burned. Then he climbed into the tail and practiced the smooth traverse, left, right, left, until it felt like a metronome set to survival. There's a moment before every legend when all you have is an empty page and a pen that might not write. For Hell's Fury, it fell between the superstition of a cursed seat and the arithmetic of a man who preferred action. For Donovan, it was the space between a statistic and a choice. 38% do not finish. 62 do. The difference, he believed, lived in the first burst. The first time Donovan turned numbers into leverage was Schweinfurt, March 2nd, the mission that turned every dial on the fear board to red. The brief said ball bearings, which is another way of saying everything the Reich rolls on. The formation stepped up over East Anglia like a staircase to the sun, engines drumming a hymn to courage and bad odds. In Hell's Fury's tail, Donovan worked his checklists until they stopped being lines on paper and became a feeling in the wrists, the contrails braided above them. The cold came through the skin of the airplane, and when the first black blossoms of flak opened outside, he did what he had trained himself to do. He counted, not the bursts, but the beats between them. Rhythm is timing, and timing is survival. The fighters arrived on schedule, pinpoints turning into daggers, assembling into that practiced echelon that German training had polished to a grin. Doctrine said let them commit. Doctrine said wait for a clean shot inside 800 yards. Doctrine, Donovan had decided, knew less about fear than a South Boston alley at midnight. He pressed a short burst into empty air at what the range tables called wishful thinking 2,000 yards and watched the effect ripple through the geometry. It was not accuracy he was buying. It was hesitation. The shape of the attack wobbled like a chord with one note, suddenly out of tune. The lead element crabbed sideways. The wingmen widened their spacing almost invisibly. It was enough. When they finally ran the play, Hell's Fury was not the fixed target they had drawn in their heads, and the first 109 that crossed his sight line flashed from hard silhouette to a machine in pain. 1 down. 2 damaged. More important, the crew's breathing changed. A thing that Hunchu had flinched. On the ground, Crew Chief Frank Murphy counted the feed links with the tenderness of a man tallying someone else's luck. 1,600 rounds, he said, eyebrows teleporting upward. Standard load is 2,000. You spent 80% on one mission. And we did not get hit, Donovan answered, already replaying the film in his mind. I will take that trade every day. 2 days later, March 4th, the test got bolder. Another factory, another staircase of silver machine. Same predators building the same pattern, 4 to 6 in echelon, coming from 6 high. Everyone in gunnery school is taught to track the lead because the lead is the danger, the point, the shark's nose. Donovan tracked the second plane, the wingman, the one whose job was to be invisible until the last second, holding perfect spacing, so the formation looked like a single will. He dialed his lead not to where the wingman was, but to where discipline was about to carry him. The burst cut into that predictable path. The 109 cartwheeled so quickly it felt like a trick, flames unrolling from the engine cowling, and the lead suddenly bereft of the comfort of formation broke off. The whole playbook went paper in the wind. The debates on the hardstand were half comedy, half religion. Waist gunners ribbed him about spray and pray, then quietly asked for his dope settings. Whitmore said nothing in front of the crew, and everything with a nod behind him. In the barracks, under weak lights that made every man look older, Donovan laid out the Luftwaffe's stern quarter doctrine on a scrap of brown wrapping paper. Lead draws fire. Wingman exploits fixation. The next element times its run to the defender's reload. The American answer had always been conservation. Hold your fire. Take the sure shot. Survive multiple passes. The flaw was obvious to him now. If you wait for a sure shot, you are playing inside the enemy's script. You are confirming to him that his plan has matured to the point of harvest. He wrote it down like a catechism. Seize initiative. Attack during formation. Intimidate before you injure. Focus fire where it hurts the plan, not where it impresses the scoreboard. Spend 10 rounds early to save 10,000 pounds of airplane later. It was not just zeal. It was arithmetic carried out in adrenaline and aluminum. 20 rounds at 800 yards might be waste on paper, but if it makes 4 fighters widen by a wingspan, it pushes their firing solutions into slop. If it forces one to break and the others to think, it buys seconds. Seconds were a currency he had learned to hoard in alleys and in rings long before he strapped into a plexiglass blister. He practiced the quiet parts no one sees. Traverse without chatter. Burst length as a metronome, 3 heartbeats for suppression, 5 for commitment, everything else a lie. Tracer placement like stagecraft 1 in 5, sometimes 1 in 7, so that what looked like a river of fire was actually a string of ghosts. He drilled his voice too, because the tail is a conductor's podium. Panic spreads faster than bullets, order a little slower than calm. He made himself say 6 of the clock coming in the same way, whether it was 6 planes or 16. The mission was to bend the enemy psychology until it snapped before their wings did. By the night of March 5th, his notes looked like a gambler system and a boxer's plan and a gunner's prayer all at once. In the morning, he would get a chance to try the whole recipe, not just the appetizers. The target was Augsburg. The number of fighters intel promised would be biblical. He slept a little and dreamed of lines on paper turning into arrows in the sky, and of the tiny moment when those arrows could be turned back on the archers. Dawn at Framlingham came thin and gray, the kind of light that makes men look like ghosts of themselves. In the briefing hut, the map board bristled with strings and grease pencil arcs. The target, the aircraft works at Augsburg, the number that made throats go dry, a bomber stream in the hundreds, 800 B-17s, and intelligence whispering that as many as 2,500 German fighters could be thrown at them across the day. The room smelled of coffee and fear pretending to be jokes. Captain Whitmore traced the ingress with a baton as if tapping a vein. This one's going to be rough. Stay sharp. Stay alive. Donovan raised his hand, not high, just enough to cut the air. Permission to try something different, sir. Whitmore did not blink. Like what? Aggressive fire during their formation phase. Engage before they commit. Force them to defend before they attack. That burns ammunition, Whitmore said. You will be dry before the real fight. Or I will prevent the real fight, Donovan replied. Sir, we have been playing defense for 2 years. 38% tail gunner casualties says it is not working. Maybe it is time we stop waiting to get shot. It was not a speech so much as a statement of accounting. Whitmore measured him with a look that weighed reputations against odds. Then he nodded once, the way a man signs his name to a risk. You have got one mission to prove it. If we get shredded, you are off the gun. Deal. They launched at 0647, patched aluminum turning into instruments and ritual and breath on microphones. Assembly over East Anglia, the great staircase to the stratosphere rising rung by rung. The channel slid beneath like a slate that never ends. At 082 they crossed into German airspace, and the contrails staggered into lanes of purpose. Routine has a hum engine song, oxygen hiss, the little clicks of men checking little switches, and then routine breaks. At 0919 the call came over the interphone, clipped and flat. Fighters, 6 of the clock high. 12 bandits. Donovan swiveled in his glass bubble, the world shrinking to rings and reticle. 2,000 yards out, the Messerschmitts formed like chess pieces being set for a game they never lose. Standard response, wait for commitment, then pick the lead. Donovan did neither. He breathed out and touched the butterfly triggers. At 2,000 yards maximum range, where textbooks call it vanity, his tracers stitched the sky. Most went nowhere, bright commas fading in blue, but the effect on the German geometry was immediate and human. The formation hiccuped. The leader broke right. Wingmen hesitated. Spacing went ragged. A disciplined line turned into a cluster of men reconsidering. "Donovan, cease fire," Whitmore snapped in his ears. "You are wasting ammunition." "Negative, sir," Donovan said, voice even. "Watch what happens next." He did not have to wait long. The 109s regrouped, but their approach had lost its swing. Instead of a clean, diving arc, they probed, wary, like wolves circling a steer with horns they had not expected. Donovan let them close to 1,500 yards and sent short. Precise bursts not to hit, but to bruise confidence. Again the weave broke. 11 pilots flinched. One did not. Left side wingman, flying like someone who had learned to ignore ghosts. A veteran, Donovan thought. The kind who needs a different conversation. He held fire as the range tumbled 1,400, 1,211. Instructors would have opened sustained fire. Donovan waited until the cockpit of the 109 was a dark oval in his glass. Then he poured a 3-second storm, 200 rounds, walking into inevitability. The Messerschmitt tried to brake and flew straight into the stream. The canopy spider-webbed. An orange tongue licked through the engine cowling. The fighter rolled inverted and disintegrated. "Good kill," the radio operator breathed, as if he were watching someone steal seconds back from God. But there was no time to tally. The remaining 11 split, 6 coming straight from 6 of the clock, 5 curving in from 7. This was the counter to aggression. Divide his attention, force him to sample everything and swallow nothing. Donovan had already planned for it. "Waste, you have got 7, he said, not turning, not dithering. "I am holding 6. Sergeants Tommy Price and Carl Johnson answered with the sound of guns becoming weather at 7 of the clock. Below, the ball turret whirred its low, insectum. Donovan fixed on the 6 of the clock group. First in line tap. Hold blossomed into shrapnel and smoke. The second, suddenly lead without warning, instinctively straightened. Donovan was already there with the next burst. In 30 seconds the sky ate 3 109s, and the other 9 doing their own math now broke and ran, not to reposition, but to leave. Silence is different after success. It is not quiet. It is breath-held. Donovan reloaded with a mechanic's patience and a thief's speed, checked his boxes. 1,200 rounds expended. 800 left. Enough for 1 heavy exchange or 2 thin ones. On the interphone, someone laughed once and then swallowed it. Ahead, Augsburg waited like an appointment you could not forget. Somewhere out there, the enemy remembered too. And the book Donovan had started writing at 2,000 yards was only on its first page. The lull lasted just long enough for the oxygen hiss to sound like surf. Then the horizon seated itself with more steel. 18 fighters, an entire staffel pushed down from the high bluish haze, their formation a saw blade set to bite. They did not bother with theater. No teasing arcs, no showy head fakes. They came in on multiple vectors at once, 6 from dead astern, 5 from 7 of the clock, the rest cutting in from 4 and 5 like chisels trying to turn Hell's Fury's rear hemisphere into a geometry problem no man could solve. The usual answer in the manuals is to spread the pain. Everybody throws something at everything, and you pray your pilot's evasive jinx keep you 1 hair off a firing solution. Donovan rejected the buffet. If you eat a little of every dish, you starve. Waste, keep 7, he said, voice steady as a level bubble. Ball sweep 5 to 4. I have got 6. He refused the urge to peck at threats out of the corner of his eye. He locked his world into a tunnel and filled it with the 6 coming straight. Closing speed tells a story faster than fear can. Between AB-17 and oncoming fighters, it is roughly 400 knots miles and physics slamming together in a countdown. At 1,200 yards, his thumbs kissed the triggers, a measured stutter to massage the line, not wasted. 1 Messerschmitt wavered and then committed anyway, angling for the sweet spot where a cannon burst would rake the tailplane. At 1,000 yards the bomber's deck trembled under the weight of its own passage. At 900, Donovan began to walk the tracers not onto metal, but onto the empty space that would become metal, the future positions plotted by instinct and repetition. At 800 he started to hit. The leader's canopy crazed, the nose dipped, and the 109 became a comet of hurt. Now the clock was a hammer. 400 yards. 3 seconds to impact. Switching targets at this distance is 1 part physics, 9 parts nerve. He did not chase the second fighter. He threw a river where the second fighter had to swim. He led not by inches, but by a heartbeat and a half what his body knew a human hand would do at a stick when surprised at murder range. The Messerschmitt ran headlong into inevitability, orange blooming from the cowling. The air around Hell's Fury suddenly sparked thick, with parts that used to be a plan. 2 kills. 3 seconds. The interphone went wordless except for breath. Below, the ball turret's guns rapped a hard tattoo. To port, the waist positions wrote bright cursive across the sky at 7. Donovan felt their work in the way his own picture stayed clean. And then, statistically, inevitably, courage failed somewhere inside the swarm. The remaining fighters at 6 broke formation, the invisible agreement that holds men inside a death charge, shattering with the sight of 2 leaders, turned to fire in the span of a single inhale. They wheeled off some high, some low, none eager to test the tunnel again. Donovan let them go. Ammunition is a kind of blood. You keep it in you until there's no other way to live. Reload. Box latch up, belt seated. Feed check by touch without looking habits, so worn they felt older than he was. Last belt but one. The gauge in his head tallied. 1,200 gone earlier. Now another 400 burnt to ash and momentum. 800 rounds remained. Enough to make noise or make change, not both. Ahead, Augsburg lay like a dare across the map. Around them, the sky's temperature changed a subtle thing. The way predators cool the air when they pace outside the firelight. The Messerschmitts returned, but not like hunters. Like mathematicians. They did not commit. They shadowed. Just outside honest gun range, they slid along the bomber stream like pickpockets waiting for a doorway, and Donovan felt the hair on his neck stand up under the oxygen mask. This was not fatigue or fear. It was pattern recognition. When wolves circle but do not strike, they are counting teeth and calling the pack. Whitmore's voice came back clipped, controlled, the way men talk when they recognize a shape they hoped they would never see. They are not attacking. They are calling in friends. Expect a big show. The navigator confirmed with a prickle in his tone that radar had found company new blips, growing like mold at the edges of the scope. 10 minutes is a lifetime and a blink at altitude. It was long enough for the first wave of fear to boil off into something workable. It was short enough that no one had to confront the deeper math out loud. When the newcomers finally revealed themselves, they did not creep. They arrived like a verdict. 36 fresh fighters BF-109s and FW-190s mixed, slotting in with the 12 that had been shadowing. 48 enemies aligning against one isolated ship, because Hell's Fury had drifted from the warm geometry of overlapping fields and friendly guns. No escorts in reach. No neighboring bombers, close enough to stitch their arcs onto hers. A single machine, a single-tail gun, inside a problem too big for reasonable men. Donovan tallied ammunition and found the number insulting. 380 rounds. Enough to win a knife fight, not a war. He thought of the chalk catechism on brown paper. He thought of what panic does to patterns. The formation 2,000 yards out was not a set of planes. It was a thought becoming an act. Thoughts can be broken earlier than acts. He clicked the interphone. "Captain," he said, calm as if ordering breakfast, permission to attack their formation. Whitmore did not speak for 3 heartbeats that sounded like a year. "Do it," he said finally. "If this kills us, I am writing your family a very angry letter." "Understood," Donovan answered, and leaned the guns not at an airplane, but at the space where coordination lived. At 2,000 yards, the enemy was still an idea more than a danger, vectors knitting themselves into intent. Donovan decided to shoot the idea. He opened the butterflies and held them open, no seasoning bursts, no polite taps, just an 8-second, 200-round scythe raked straight through the air, where formation discipline lives. Tracers stitched the invisible membranes that keep men aligned. One BF-109 at the seam of two elements took a lick of fire and lit, sliding out of position as if yanked by an unseen hook. Two others juked opposite directions to miss the stream and clipped wingtips metal-kissed metal, then tore. The pair corkscrewed down, streaming parts and smoke, and the entire 48 ship attack unspooled like a rope cut at the middle. Lines lost their tautness. Spacing wobbled. Attack vectors that were supposed to cross like fine calligraphy became scribbles. For Heartbeat, the sky was not a battlefield, but the inside of a shaken snow globe. Holy Whitmore started, then left a word in the air. Everyone could see it. The largest coordinated strike any of them had faced had just become 48 frightened soloists. But chaos is a short shelf life advantage. Donovan knew he had bought seconds, not salvation. He counted the belt by feel. 200 spent on that first carve, the last heavy withdrawal from a bank already on fumes. He eased off, not because he wanted to, but because arithmetic has teeth. 90 seconds later, less time than it takes to boil coffee on the ground. The Germans, angry now, did the primitive sensible thing. They quit chess and came for bludgeon. 12 fighters duffed together from 6 of the clock. No spacing niceties, no tidy geometry. Just a packed snarl meant to saturate his sight line and his nerves at once. Donovan ignored the closest, the loudest, the most tempting. He looked for the courage, knowed the pilot who held the Paxwell together, and found it 2 ships in from the left. A 109, flying a fraction too steady. The kind of steadiness men adopt when others are keying off them. He put a 30-round burst through that steadiness. The fighter staggered. A tongue of flame took the cowling. The swarm's center psychological, not geometric, collapsed. He slid to the next anchor, another controlled 30, then the third. 1 exploded clean. 2 peeled off, trailing thick smoke. 9 came on anyway, but they came on with a hole in their heartbeat. Now the range was 400 yards, the place where mistakes become collisions. Cannon rounds wanged past the tail. A 20 millimeters found metal somewhere aft, and hell's fury shuddered. A dog shaking off cold water. Donovan kept the guns talking in precise sentences. Target, pause, target, pause, never letting the line go sloppy. Another 109 blew apart, then another. And then you could taste the decision occur inside living men. At 200 yards, 3 of the remaining attackers broke, not because the geometry said so, but because a primitive survival bell rang. He followed one more down the barrel, squeezed, and heard a click that was not a click so much as a verdict. "I am out," he said into the interphone, voice level, because panic is contagious and calm is too. "Dry on all guns." "Copy," Whitmore replied, instantly practical. "Damage check. Ball turret nicked but breathing. Waist hungry for belts but intact. Rudder stressed, not snapped." The ship still flew, a bruised bird with its tail stinger plucked. Out behind them, 27 enemy fighters remained from the original 48. 21 had gone to gravity or limped away. The loss rate was obscene. The calculus those pilots had learned in briefing huts was bleeding out on the math. But they had 1 card left that looked like an ace. The tail guns were silent. They formed again at 6 low, the classic execution vector when a B-17 Scorpion tail has been devenomed. Tight approach, minimal weave, close enough to read the rivets and make each 20 millimeters count. Donovan had nothing but glass and poise. He put the muzzles on the lead fighter and tracked with relentless smoothness, tiny corrections to stay locked on canopy, not cowling. It was theater, but not a bluff, exactly more like a pressure on the nerve. The lead German saw those motionless twin 50s following his eyes and felt a lifetime of training shove against a moment of animal impulse. He broke hard right. The men behind him, lashed to his decision by instinct and discipline, broke too. The whole elegant kill run folded itself up because an empty threat felt full. "They are breaking off," the ball turret gunner said, half laugh, half prayer. Donovan did not move. He kept the barrel steady on the receding shapes, as if bullets were still a choice he could make. They did not return. The pack that had come like a hammer left like water, spreading, thinning, becoming mist. Word travels in war faster than contrails. By the time Hell's Fury passed the initial point into Augsburg, German chatter had marked her avoid the red devil at the rear. Its tail will cost you. The ship droned in, steadied, and dropped its load across the works like a signature. On egress, they crossed 3 more fighter contacts, but none chose to pay the toll. If you listened hard through the oxygen hiss and engine thrum, you could almost hear the fear doing math in someone else's cockpit. When they finally turned their nose toward the cold green of England, the tail felt as light as a lie. Empty boxes, warm barrels, hands that did not shake. Donovan watched the contrails behind them write proof across the sky. Aggression had become armor. Acting first had made the enemy think twice last. He let himself breathe then, just once, and only then, as the channel took them back like a gray hand, did the adrenaline loose its grip. Framlingham wore its victories like it wore its ring quietly, with puddles where celebration might have been. Hell's Fury rolled onto the hardstand at 1647, 9 hours after she would left, and the ground crew came at her like medics to a boxer between rounds. 47 bullet holes, 13 cannon gouges, a weeping hydraulic line that traced a thin red tear down her belly, a rudder crazed like old porcelain, but the wheels were under her and the props were still biting air. Donovan slid out of the tail blister, unlatched, unfolded, and stood on the tarmac as if he would just stepped off a bus. Crew Chief Frank Murphy cracked the ammo doors, found nothing but warm air and a lingering brass smell. "You used everything," Murphy said. 2,000 rounds. Donovan took the offered cigarette, lit it, and answered through smoke that drifted like spent contrails. "Had to. Did not have enough to waste." Counting kills in the 8th was part science, part sermon. Murphy gathered witness statements from the crew, cross-checked with fragments of radio intercepts, and later, with reports from P-51s that finally slid into their quadrant near the target area. The number that hardened into the logbook was 12 confirmed, 4 probables, 3 damaged. Captain Whitmore read it back without drama, 12 in a single mission, with the heavy lifting happening in minutes that could be recited like a prayer. Word ambled across the field in the way good gossip does without feet, somehow everywhere at once. By sunset, waist gunners from neighboring ships were asking Donovan about his sight picture at long range. By midnight, pilots from other groups were sniffing around the Nissen huts, more curious than territorial. By morning, headquarters sent a staff car. Major General Frederick Anderson did not waste anyone's time. He found Donovan on a bench with a cleaning mat, field stripping his habits along with his guns. "At ease, Sergeant," Anderson said, his voice a plain instrument. "I am here to understand what you did yesterday." Donovan laid it out without punctuation tricks. Early engagement during the formation phase. Not for hits, but to break the attacker's timing. The focus on the wingman to shatter the lead's confidence. The refusal to divide attention when outnumbered. The deliberate use of psychology as a weapon equal to steel. Anderson listened and then asked the only question that mattered. "Can you teach this to the right men?" "Not all of them," Donovan said. "You need gunners who think like fighters. Decisive. Comfortable with risk. Willing to bleed the first seconds so the crew does not bleed the next minutes." "Find them," Anderson said. "Effective immediately. You are reassigned to training command. Build me a program." Donovan looked toward Hell's Fury, the tail blister glinting like a pupil, and hesitated, as if listening to something only he could hear. "Sir, I would rather stay with my crew." "Your crew does not need you," Anderson replied, not unkindly. "Other crews do. What is worth more, 9 men or 9,000? Arithmetic again." Donovan nodded once. Orders became doctrine. They called it, unofficially, the Donovan Doctrine before the ink dried. The curriculum came together in 3 parts: mind, mechanics, and math. Mind meant seizing initiative. Fear happens when you react. Confidence happens when you act first. He told classes until the words sank into bone. Mechanics meant sight discipline, belt management, traverse without chatter, burst lengths you could conduct with a metronome. Math meant understanding that 30 rounds at 800 yards that shatter a formation are cheaper than 300 rounds at 200 yards that chase survivors. He taught them to attack where coordination lived: formation centers, timing nodes, The courage anchors inside a swarm rather than to pluck isolated targets for the scoreboard. Not everyone made it. About 30% washed out, not for lack of heart, but for a surplus of caution they could not unlearn. The ones who stayed became a different species of defender, the kind that turned the enemy's approach into a question mark. Through spring into summer 1944, the numbers began to reflect the shift. Tail gunner casualty rates, which had hovered like a curse around 38%, dropped as aggressive defense propagated across crews and groups. Fighter attack completion rates, the percentage of enemy runs that carried all the way to firing position, sank as early fire punctured formation nerve. The waist and ball positions borrowed the doctrine too, turning their arcs into early warning scythes that scrubbed the edges of incoming plays before they ripened. Resistance, naturally, came standard. Traditionalists called the doctrine wasteful and reckless, accused Donovan of teaching bright kids to gamble with ammunition they would prayerfully need later. Tactics officers muttered about spray and pray. Donovan's rebuttal stayed the same: prevention is economy. 1,000 pounds of bomber brought home by a burst wasted at range is profit. The ledger does not lie. Across the channel, the enemy's paperwork started telling the story from the other side. Luftwaffe after-action notes filtered through intelligence began to warn pilots about American ships that opened early, held sustained lanes through formation centers, and fixated on-wing men to unspool attacks. The recommended counter was simple and sour: avoid stern approaches on aggressively defended bombers. Seek high-angle dives from 11 or 1 of the clock. Find easier prey. Avoid is the most honest compliment an enemy can pay. By August, Donovan had trained 300 tail gunners. Names began to stand out in the rosters: Bailey, with 16 in 4 missions, Chun with 27 sorties, and a tail blister that never took a fatal hit. More important than tallies, though, was the contagion of caution they seeded in German cockpits. A reputation traveled with the bomber stream like an escort of rumor. These crews shoot first. These crews do not scare right. The doctrine left the tail and seeped into the bloodstream of air war, into escort tactics, into transport defense, eventually into the logic of early engagement that modern missile systems use to break coordination before it becomes annihilation. On a field that smelled of solvent and cut grass, Donovan stepped away from combat ancient at 20 in the way only war makes men. He traded rounds for lessons and discovered that rewriting the moment before the first shot fires can rewrite the rest of the day. The celebration, when it came, was mostly numbers and nods. Donovan's name turned into a curriculum and then bled out of the headlines before it ever got there. He did not mind. When the orders fixed him to training command, he did the work and then went home. Boston again. The docks again, in a different role construction this time. Hands that had guided guns now guiding rebar and plumb lines. Reporters found him once or twice in the 1960s and tried to coax a war story. He shrugged the way only a man with the loudest minutes of his life locked behind his teeth can shrug. I did what needed doing, he said. So did 300 other gunners. He meant it as a period, not an ellipsis. History, which prefers parades, tried to pass him by with footnotes. When he died in 1998 at 76, the Boston Globe gave him a small, neat obituary, Distinguished Service Cross. 16 years in construction. Wife Margaret. 3 children. A paragraph on developed new tactics. It did not say what new had meant at 23,000 feet. It did not say 12 kills in a mission, or 4 minutes that bent doctrine. It did not say 3,000 lives saved by a decision to move the first shot backward in time. On the day they lowered him into the ground at St. Augustine Cemetery, the wind worried the trees and 17 people stood under it, family mostly. 2 war buddies, no honor guard, no brass. A priest who never heard Augsburg in detail read the prayers that fit every soldier, and the earth took a quiet legend the way earth always does, by inches. The night before, in a South Boston bar, the other story got told, the one the papers never catch because it does not sit still. A scatter of old men in bomber jackets raised glasses and let memory work without rehearsal. They remember the first time they saw a formation wobble because of a long-range burst that could not possibly matter. They remembered the way a waist gunner's voice steadied because the tail was steady. They remembered the odd relief of watching a swarm break before it could become a clean, beautiful kill run. Bailey Thomas, the student who put 16 down in 4 missions, lifted his glass and gave the stark arithmetic in a voice that had become mostly gravel. Before him, we thought survival meant hiding, making ourselves small, conserving, he said. Mike taught us survival means making the enemy scared to attack you. Sounds simple. Changes everything. Heads nodded around the table because sometimes revolution is a change of when, not what. By then the ledgers had long since caught up to the anecdotes. Through spring into summer 1944, tail gunner casualty rates in the 8th Air Force slid from the bleak plateau 38% down toward numbers men could live with. Fighter attack completion rates, the percentage of enemy runs that actually reached firing position, fell from better than half to barely a quarter. Bomber loss rates per 1,000 sorties dropped, not to zero, but by a margin you could feel in mess halls and mail calls. Even German paperwork, pried loose after the war, corroborated the shape of the new fear. Luftwaffe after-action notes warned against stern approaches on American bombers that opened early and held their fire like a knife to a formation's throat. Recommended high-angle dives from 11 or 1 of the clock. Recommended, when possible, avoiding those crews entirely. Avoid is not strategy, it is surrender to the power of reputation. Doctrine is a contagion when it works. The Donovan Doctrine leapt compartments. Waist and Ball adopted it. Fighter escorts bent their own timing to the same principle, disrupt coordination before it coheres. Transports and other theaters trained their gunners to shoot the idea of an attack during the build. And years later, in rooms lit by different maps and different wars, the logic hardened into silicon. Early engagement as psychology and math. Missile defense systems designed to break the choreography before it becomes choreography at all. The weapons changed. The verb did not. Donovan himself never tallied the totals historians would later staple to his name. He did not read the German memos assigning 28% of their declining effectiveness to aggressive American gunners. He did not know that by war's end, graduates of his course would account for nearly half of tail gunner victories in the theater. He did not attend the reunions where the numbers melted into laughter and bad coffee and long silences. He simply lived, the way most men do after doing unusual things, privately. But the sky remembers what paper forgets. March 6, 1944 still hangs up there if you know where to look, for minutes that turned defense into offense. 2,000 rounds. 12 enemy fighters erased. A bomber that got home because one man decided that fear should happen in a German cockpit first. The creed he wrote, without writing it, remains the simplest kind of complicated. Seize initiative. Weaponize psychology. Focus fire where plans live, not where ego points. Spend early to save later. Accept risk not as bravado, but as calculus on behalf of the crew and the mission. If this story moved you, carry it forward. Like and subscribe if you want more histories, where the hinge is a human choice, where someone refused to let the enemy ask the first question. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We honor these men by remembering their names and by remembering the seconds in which they chose to act.